Good morning. This is Dina Bosworth, Director of Governmental Affairs for the Michigan Association of Counties, and welcome to our high water webinar. We are going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. We're just waiting on our presenter to get online. So give us just a moment.
Deanna's back on, still issues with the webcam though.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully we'll be able to hear you, and the slides will be up on the screen for everyone. So I just want to say good morning and welcome to the second week of MAC's virtual conference and the workshop on high water in Michigan. We have record high levels that have caused destruction all across the state of Michigan, from farms to personal property to our scenic shorelines. This natural disaster has had a great negative impacts on human life, infrastructure, and county finances. With water levels expected to continue to rise through 2020, what resources are available for counties and which federal and state partners can help you acquire them? Today, Deanna Apps from the Great Lakes is a Great Lakes forecaster with the Army Corps of Engineers, and she'll talk about what we can expect in the future and how we can responsibly respond to it. A couple things before we start, though. We will take questions at the end, so please type your questions in the question field, and then we'll review them and we'll pose the question to Deanna. This whole webinar should take about an hour, should be no more than an hour. It is being recorded and it will be on our website for you to view at any time. And remember that you have to register for each virtual event. So if you haven't signed up for the rest of the conference events, please do so after this session by visiting the conference page on our website's homepage. Now, please welcome Deanna. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you. Glad that we were still able to do this virtually. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about water levels. Kind of give some basin conditions overview. Go over the 6-month forecast, and just kind of what to expect this summer. My name is Deanna Apps. I work out of the Detroit district through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And let's jump right in. So first off, I want to make a point that this really has been a Great Lakes wide event. Beginning last year with those large spring rises in water levels we saw. We started to set records on some of the lakes in May of 2019, and that's really we've been really near above record highs ever since. And so these are just some pictures throughout the basin that kind of highlight some of the high water impacts we've been seeing. So up in the top left, you can see there's a picture near Duluth off the Lake Superior shoreline, some flooding there this fall. Again, top right from South Haven, Michigan. This was also during the fall of this year. You can see some debris has been, washed up shore and causing some impacts there to that shoreline. The bottom left from Stony Point, Michigan on the Lake Erie shoreline here, you can see waves, overtopping seawalls and causing flooding in this community. And then in the bottom right in Oswego, New York, off Lake Ontario, you can see some flooding as well in that area. So this really has been, felt across the basin. So as we get started, I know this slide is a lot of text, but I just want to go over a couple things, and a lot of these points will follow with some slides coming up here. So just to start with some notes about Great Lakes water levels. So they're not measured as a depth, but an elevation above sea level. And that's in reference to the International Great Lakes datum of 1985. As you hear me talk to the presentation, you'll hear me say Lake Michigan Huron. We consider Lake Michigan Huron one lake since they're connected at the Straits of Mackinac. From a forecast perspective, they rise and fall together. So you'll hear me reference them as one lake. At our office, we calculate lake-wide daily average water levels. Then at the end of the month, we take those lake-wide daily means and calculate a lake-wide monthly mean. And that's really the main data set that we coordinate and use, like in our, when we're for our period of record and when, we're obviously doing monthly forecasts. Those lake-wide daily average water levels are calculated based on a network of water level gauges. So we use, a variety of number of gauges for each lake, which I'll show on another slide coming up here of what those networks look like for each of the lakes to give us that average water level. And these, we do that so those are calculated really so we're basing it on still water. We use a number of gauges, so we're not having specific influences at one location that could be, affected by wind or for example. At the Detroit District, we are what we call maybe the keeper of official monthly water level statistics. We also coordinate that data set with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Right now, our current period of record goes back to 1918 and is through the most current full year, which is 2019. We also coordinate our forecast with Environment and Climate Change Canada as well. So we work very closely with them. And as you'll hear me touch on throughout this presentation, that the primary drivers of water level fluctuations are the changing weather patterns and that resulting impact in water supply. So as we're going to switch into kind of monitoring of the Great Lakes Basin. As many of us know, the Great Lakes Basin is quite large. You can see on this diagram on the right here, this is showing that everything highlighted in that green area is considered the Great Lakes Basin, covering over 14,000 miles of shoreline, and it's an international basin. So it covers 8 states and 2 provinces on the Canadian side. So we're tracking a lot of things that are going on in the basin. Anything from temperature, precipitation, evaporation, runoff, ice cover, surface water temperatures, all those things, we're keeping an eye on it in the basin. Also, you can see on the bottom left here, this is a side profile view of the basin. I like to show this because it really helps to show how water is flowing through the system. If water starting here in Lake Superior flows through the St. Mary's River into Lakes Michigan and Lake Huron, through the St. Clair River into Lake St. Clair, through the Detroit River into Lake Erie, through the Niagara River over the Niagara Falls into Lake Ontario, and then out through the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. I also like to point out on this slide that there are 2 places in the system where outflows are regulated. Through the St. Mary's River from Lake Superior into Lakes Michigan and Huron, and out of Lake Ontario through the St. Lawrence River. Regulation of these outflows is the responsibility of their respective boards of control. So the International Lake Superior Board of Control and the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board of Control. And that's all through under the authority of the International Joint Commission. However, I want to stress that regulation of outflows cannot prevent extreme high or low water levels, nor can they fully control water levels. Water levels, again, are mainly driven by weather and Mother Nature. So as I mentioned on that note slide, that network of water level gauges, this gives you a breakdown of kind of what water level gauges are used in that network. So all these green dots you see, those are all water level gauges run on the Canadian side of the borders. They're all run by the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans. All the blue dots are run by NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and that's on the U.S. side. Any dot that's bolded, that's a bigger circle, those are the gauges that are used in calculating the lake-wide average daily water level. And I've highlighted those cities down here below for each of the lakes. So each lake uses a different number of gauges. Is used to be spaced out again to try to mitigate some of that localized variation at one location. So now I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit, kind of talk about some of the factors that impact water levels. And there's really 3 main meteorological variables that we use called net basin supply that influence water levels. And that's precipitation over the lake, runoff to the lake, and then evaporation off of the lake surface. So those are the 3, the 3 main variables we're tracking. we also have to account for inflow from the upstream lake and outflows out of that lake. So for example, for Lake Michigan Huron, we have to account for inflow from the St. Mary's River and outflow through the St. Clair River. So what does this look like on an annual basis? Water levels fluctuate seasonally. So they go through a seasonal cycle every year, and a lot of that has to do with the hydrologic cycle. Typically in the winter, when we are seeing snow accumulation and the ground is frozen, that's when we typically see our seasonal low in water levels. As we enter the late winter, early spring, that's when we start to see water levels begin to rise. And that's due to snow melt, increased precipitation, and as a result of that melting snow and increased rainfall or precipitation, you have increased runoff. And that's, typically, like I said, when we're seeing water levels rise. As we get into the late summer or early fall, depending on the lake, that's when we typically reach our seasonal peak in water level. During this time, we're seeing increased sunshine, which is helping to warm the lake water. And that's important as we get into the fall, because in the fall, that's when we enter the period of seasonal decline. This is the fall and early winter. And the main reason that contributes to that seasonal decline is evaporation. And evaporation occurs when you start having colder air moving over those warm lake water. And that's really what induces significant evaporation, when you have cold, really cold air moving over a relatively warm lake. So this is our full period of record of water levels. This is going back to 1918. That blue line is the monthly mean water level for each lake. This is the hydrograph for each lake. Lake Superior at the top, Lake Michigan Huron here, in the middle here, Lake St. Clair, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. And so this is kind of showing you what it looks like over that full period from 1918 through really through 2020, even though technically we're coordinated through 2019. 2020 data right now is considered provisional data. That red line is the long-term average annual level. And I like, when I'm talking about this graphic, I like to just kind of focus on one of the lakes. So I'm going to focus on Lake Michigan Huron. So it gives you can really denote periods of high and low water. So through our period of record that, just back through 1918, you can see that there's been other times with periods of high and low water. You can see a low water period here in the, early to mid 30s, a high water period here in the early 50s, another low water period here in the, early to mid 60s. A lot of people remember the very high water here of the mid 80s. And then we get to that period of the late 1990s, when we enter that period of a decade plus of low water, with record lows. We on Lake Michigan Huron hit a record low water level in January of 2013. But after 2013, we start to see a record rise in water levels over the next couple years. And by 2015, we're back above that long-term annual average line. And then annually over the last couple years, we've continued to rise and reach these record high water levels that we've seen in 2019 and 2020. So in this slide, I want to give you an overview of the water level records that we've reached in 2019 and 2020. Now, again, this is based off monthly mean water levels. So after that, like I said in the beginning, after that large spring rise we saw in water levels, in May of 2019, we started to see monthly mean water levels broken on some of the lakes, and that was on Lake Superior, St. Clair, and Erie. Those three lakes continued to either break or tie records through September of 2019. You can also see Lake Ontario had monthly mean records in June and July of last year. Lake Michigan Huron did not set a record in 2019. It came very close in a couple months but never, never tied or broke a record in 2019. These asterisks that you're seeing next to Erie and Ontario in June and St. Clair in July, those are there because they are noting that those are the highest monthly means on record for all months. So not only did they break, Erie and Ontario, not only did they break their June monthly mean record, those records that were set in 2019 are now the highest monthly mean on record for all months going back to 1918. You can see that the last 3 months of 2019, we didn't set any records on the lakes, although we were very close. However, now that we've entered 2020, we have seen, again, record high water levels. Specifically, now Lake Michigan Huron has set records in each of the last 3 months. So it's broken its January, its February, and its March monthly mean records so far. And then Superior has also set a couple records in Erie and St. Clair as well. So we continue to see record high water levels so far in 2020. And I'll get to the forecast later of kind of what we expect over the next 6 months. But first I want to talk about, well, why are water levels so high? How did we get here? And we know from looking at that long-term hydrograph that, really for annually over the last 6-7 years, water levels have gone up steadily. And one of the main reasons of that is we've had a very persistent wet pattern in the region. What I'm showing here is precipitation for the Great Lakes Basin on the U.S. side, and it's using over 120 plus years of data to rank these time periods. So what you're looking at here is, so the last 12 months, April 2019 to March 2020, wettest 12-month period on record. 18-month from October 2018 to March 2020, wettest 18-month period of record, and so on and so on. And wettest 24-month, wettest 36-month, wettest 48, and wettest 60-month period in the period of record. So over, that's your wettest 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year periods in, like I said, in over 120 plus years of data. So we've really seen very wet conditions, and this has been pretty consistent, really over the last year. We continue, even as new data comes in at the end of the month, we're consistently seeing this has, been, the wettest, year on record, wettest 2 years, and so on and so on. So that gives you kind of a longer term picture. I'm going to take a couple slides here and kind of talk about what kind of conditions we've seen recently. So the winter precipitation was generally above average. What you're seeing here on this diagram on the left, this is accumulated precipitation represented as a percent of means from December 1st to February 29th. So this winter period. You can see a lot of the green is representing precipitation that was above average. Some of these areas here that are in like that yellow, like southeast Wisconsin, that's precipitation near or slightly below average. But you can generally see for most of Michigan and the Upper Peninsula and the parts of the Lake Superior Basin did see above average precipitation. And this was a result of a pretty wet December and especially January. Those 2 months were generally wetter than average. However, February was pretty dry. February throughout the basin was, we saw relatively low precipitation, and it was well below average. However, in March, you can see that this is a similar graphic, but just showing just the March data. Again, you're seeing these greens and blues, which are showing a precipitation above average. So March, followed with another wet month after a fairly dry month in February. Also, as far as temperature goes, the winter temperature was generally above average. These orange outlines here denoting, for most of the basin, it was about, 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit above average throughout the region. And just kind of what I have noted here is that the warmer than average temperatures in December and January really reduce the amount of evaporation off of the lakes. As we talked about in the hydrologic cycle slide, really to induce significant evaporation, you really want you need cold air moving over that relatively warm lake. And so when you have warmer than normal temperatures, now that temperature difference between the air and the water is much less. And that's what I mean when it reduced the amount of evaporation. So we saw really below average evaporation during those early winter months, which really had some impacts on the lake level decline, which we'll see in a couple slides later on. February was also warmer than average, but there was enough cold air outbreaks during the month where it got pretty cold that did allow for some increased evaporation to occur. And then just noting, March also had above average temperatures. We've really been warmer than normal for much of the last few months, although April so far has kind of been fairly cool. So we'll have to see how April plays out here. And then another thing, before we get into the actual 6-month water level forecast, I wanted to briefly touch on, okay, well, these are some of the basin conditions we've seen, but what can we expect coming up in the near future as far as maybe what's likely to happen as far as basin conditions? So these are monthly and seasonal outlooks that are issued by the Climate Prediction Center. They're part of NOAA. And these are showing temperature and precipitation outlooks. So temperatures on your left there, precipitation on your right. These top two graphics are forecast for the month of May. And then these bottom two graphics are for the seasonal outlook. So they're a 3-month outlook, and these are representing forecasts for May, June, and July. So in these top two images, you can see that the Great Lakes Basin is highlighted in an area of white. And really what that means is for both temperature and precipitation, the Climate Prediction Center is forecasting equal chances, meaning that they're unsure if there's going to be a likelihood of above normal or below normal temperature or precipitation. Now, when you look at the 3-month outlook for May, June, and July, you can see that now the Great Lakes Basin is highlighted in this orange color, and that means that they're expecting that above normal temperatures to occur during that time. And then over here on the right, we're now highlighted in a green area, which signifies that for a majority of the Great Lakes Basin, they're forecasting a likelihood of above normal precipitation. So it looks like in the extended period, we can expect more warmer than normal temperatures and likely wetter than normal precipitation. So now what does that mean for the forecast? So now I'm going to walk through the 6-month forecast. I'm going to go lake by lake and highlight a couple things on each of the graphics. But before I do that, I want to start by going over kind of how to read these graphics. So what you can see here is there's a 0 line here. This 0 line on each of the lakes represents chart datum. And chart datum is different for each lake. Chart datum for Lake Superior represents 601.1 feet or 183.2 meters. And then you can see that there's a feet axis here on the left. There's a metric axis here on the right. If you're, for feet purposes, each of these lines represents about 2 inches. So this would be plus 2 inches, plus 4, plus 6, plus 8, plus 10 inches. Once you get to plus 12 inches, that's plus 1 foot on top of that chart datum. And then you get up to plus 2 feet, etc. So that's kind of how you read these and how you can understand what water levels being represented by the lines. The red line that you're seeing are monthly mean water levels for the last 2 years worth of time. So you can see from April 2018 through March of 2020. This blue dash line is the long-term average monthly level. So this is your long-term average level. So that's based off average. You can see water levels have been well above average for the last 2 years. These dashes with the years listed above and below, those represent those monthly mean water level records and the year that those records occurred. And then finally, the forecast. The forecast is represented by that green dashed line. That's what we consider the most probable. And then the hashed or bars, red bars that extend from that, those represent a 90% range of potential water levels. If we're wetter than normal, water levels would be close to the upper part of the band. If we're drier, then what's most probable will be toward the lower part of that band. So now that we understand all the pieces, let me talk about kind of what some of the highlights for Lake Superior was. So what I've highlighted here in this orangish box, those are the water levels, the monthly mean water levels that were broken last year in 2019. So they set records on Lake Superior from May through September of 2019. These purple arrows I'm using to denote the months where we've hit records in 2020. So in January and February, the Lake Superior had monthly mean records in both those months. However, in March, you can see we're just a couple inches below that record from 1986. The March 2020 level was the same level as it was in March 2019. You can see that over here. There's that March 2019 level, and it was the same level this year in March of 2020. In April, we are forecasting that Lake Superior will begin its seasonal rise. And we are forecasting for that peak water level to occur in August. And that was likely going to peak at the August record high level that was set in 2019. So for the next, really from April through July, we expect to be, a couple inches below those records that were set in 2019, or for April's sake, 1986. But then by August, we do expect that there's potential to reach that peak August 2019 level this August in 2020, and then, begin its seasonal decline in September, slightly below that September record high from last year. Now for Lake Michigan Huron, you can see I don't have a orange box because there was no monthly mean water levels set in 2019. However, you can see here that we were extremely close in multiple months in 2019 to setting records on Lake Michigan Huron, but they just fell just shy. However, that changed in 2020. Again, Lake Michigan Huron definitely felt some of those impacts of below average evaporation and a very wet fall really contributed to a very minimal decline in lake level this year. You can see that really the lake level stayed pretty flat almost through the fall and early winter. Didn't really change much, and it was wet conditions and some of that below average evaporation we saw during that time that kept water levels from really experiencing much of a decline. So you can see again so far January, February, March of 2020 we've set records. Those are provisional records. And then the forecast over the next 6 months, following this green line, we will likely be a few inches above record high monthly levels through August, and then forecasted to match its record high in September from 1986. It is going to begin its seasonal rise here over the next couple months, and we are obviously, with that small decline, we are tracking above last year. The March level of 2020 was 14 inches above the March 2019 level. So, we are seeing water levels at this time much higher than they were at this time last year. On Lake St. Clair, again, here you can see those records that were set May through September of last year. So far, we've seen records in January and March of 2020. This lake is in its period of seasonal rise. The March level was about 11 inches above the March 2019 level. It looks like from the forecast, we expect to be 4 to 6 inches above record high monthly levels in April and May, and just slightly above that June record high level from 2019. But then as we get into July, August, and September, we expect to be below those records that were set in 2019. Lake Erie is a very similar story to Lake St. Clair, where you can see we have the water level records here from 2019. We've been seeing records in February and March. This lake, again, is really in its period of seasonal rise. I believe it's forecasted to peak in May here. Expecting above records at least the next 2 months. And then, following the most probable, we do expect to be below records June through September. But, if we do see wetter conditions, there's still possibilities, and that's for a lot of the lakes, for, records in the summer months. So it's something, obviously, we track basin conditions from month to month. We put out the forecast every month so we can account for any of those changes that occur. And then finally, Lake Ontario. Again, you can see the records there from 2019. So far, no records on Lake Ontario in 2020. This lake is also in its period of seasonal rise, and so far it is tracking above last year. So March level was 8 inches above the March 2019 level. Although there is potential for water levels to get up back near records, but really for the next 6 months, it's still forecasted to remain well above average over the next 6 months. So just gonna summarize with some key points here. Water levels on all the Great Lakes started 2020 higher than 2019, and most of them are still tracking higher, although Lake Superior is pretty close to where it was last year. Lake St. Clair, Erie, and Ontario are forecast to peak below 2019 levels, but for Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, our current forecast is showing them to either match or exceed peak levels of last year. Water level fluctuations, again, are primarily driven by weather patterns, and as I mentioned earlier, regulation of outflows through the St. Mary's and St. Lawrence River cannot prevent extreme high or low water levels, nor can they fully control water levels, because again, those water level fluctuations are primarily driven by the wet conditions we've been seeing recently. And the impacts of high water are to be felt across the basin well into 2020. So we started 2020, we're still seeing impacts, and we expect to see impacts throughout the rest of the year. And this will likely be a long duration event. We're expecting high water, for at least the next 6 months, if not longer. This is usually a handout I give out, if we were in person. It kind of touches on all the links and resources that are on our webpage. So, you can go to our just general district page, and you can get the Detroit District website and get to a lot of the resources through clicking on links. These are some of the direct links to those things. So our forecasts, our water level observations, basin conditions. I want to point out this link here, the Living on the Coast. This is a great resource for people that have property on the shoreline. There's a lot of information in there, given what your shoreline is like, what some of those potential strategies are to deal with the rising water and those impacts. And also, I want to mention we do have a specific Great Lakes high water webpage that our district has, and you can find a lot of those resources. Again, there's the Living on the Coast right under those helpful links booklet that I just talked about. Also, you can get contact information for each of the offices. So, if you had a question on permitting, you could go to the regulatory office and get some of the contact info there, or our emergency management office. This is my contact information here for water levels. This is my supervisor, John Alice, who could also help out with any of the water level information that you may need. That's all I have, and I'll be happy to take questions now for the rest of the time. So.
Well, thank you, Deanna. I'm just waiting to see if anybody's going to type in any questions. So far, I don't have any, but very thorough presentation and greatly appreciate it. I know, many counties across the state, especially the coastal counties, are dealing with, everything that you've just presented on. I know that, inland counties have in the lakes that they're having trouble with too. So I'm surprised we had so many people on the call. As of now, one last chance. Does anybody have any questions for Deanna? Okay, well,
looks
if
like
not,
we just got a couple.
thank you very much. Oh, okay, good. Here we go.
Yep. I will read these off right now because they just popped in.
Okay.
Any more sandbags available for communities?
That would have to go through our emergency management office. I'm not sure. I would encourage to reach out to your local county or local city officials. If they are working, which most counties, have reached out to the Corps, and they would have the best knowledge and know kind of what's available to them. So I would suggest reaching out to your county official or emergency management to see what's available.
Great, thank you. We have another one. The question is, what resources do you suggest, as most of these flooding events don't qualify under traditional FEMA rules?
Again, I would have to really reference them to the Living on the Coast booklet that's on the helpful links. Just because every shoreline is different, and the strategy at some location might be the best strategy might be different somewhere else, and so I that's my best answer I could give for that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think that that question probably stems from the fact that we don't really have a start and end date. Doesn't really qualify. Kind of what do we do to deal with a lot of this flooding? So thank you for that. They'll look on the resources. Next question: what percentage of water change does runoff and other inputs give to water level?
Runoff, I'm not sure of the exact percentage, but it plays definitely a significant role, and especially in the springtime, especially right now. The soil is very saturated, and so we're experiencing higher runoff because there's just not a whole lot of places for the water to go at this point. So it does play a large impact in the overall water budget of each of the lakes. Like I said, especially in the springtime during when you're seeing snow melt, which is really still occurring in the Lake Superior Basin, and you're seeing some increased precipitation. So definitely is a major factor.
So if runoff is such a major factor, are there suggested methods of dealing with, the amount of runoff we have? Is there, I mean, I know, if you're going to plan for it, it's usually long term, but what do you suggest?
Geez, I don't have a good answer. I guess my gut would be, if you're experiencing, it depends. I guess it depends on what you're experiencing. If you're, if it's similar to like flooding issues or whatever, again, I would go to that, find a resource like Living on the Coast or something similar. I mean, to know what the strategy is best in a given location if you're experiencing flooding from, runoff or inland type situations.
Okay, great. All right, I think that kind of wraps up the questions. I know that this information will be on our website for anyone who wants to, see this again, watch the webinar or have links to all of these resources. So for everyone on the call, just know that you can get to our website and get all this information. Deanna, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to present to us. Greatly appreciate your knowledge and assistance in getting everybody educated on this. And with that,
not a problem. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. So
great. Well, thank you very much. And with that, I think we will end this webinar just a bit early, but thank you.